Hello developers, welcome back to the channel. It's Chris from Moralis, and in the previous section of videos we looked at the moralis.user object and the users section of the documentation. But now we're going to go over to the documentation and look at something new, and we will be looking at sending ETH, tokens and NFTs. We're going to build an application that will enable you to send native assets like Ether, BNB or Matic, and that could be either on the mainnet or a test net. We'll also be looking at transferring ERC20 tokens, and I'll show you how you can send ERC721 and 1155 tokens as well, so they would be NFTs. Now, transferring assets with the Moralis SDK is super straightforward. It requires just a single line of code in most cases. All you need to do is pass it options inside of that function. Now, you can send assets using a bare bones low-level library like web3.js, but it can be really difficult to do because you would need to, for example, know the ABI of certain smart contracts if you wanted to send NFTs. But if you went to head over to web3.js, and for example, you've got the API reference down here, and under web3.eth, if you went down to send transaction, click on that, it will take you down to the documentation for it. And you can see that in there, if you want to send a transaction to the network, you can do so. The transaction object to send would require these parameters, and some of those parameters might be quite difficult to do, specifically the data. So we have simplified the process to try and make it super straightforward to use, so you can have access to this functionality in your app with just a single line of code. So take a look through this video, and then we will be looking at transferring native assets to start with. And we'll be building through a simple application that would look like this. We're going to transfer a native balance. We're going to transfer ERC20, and I'll show you how to do it for NFTs as well. So when you enter information into these fields and click submit, it will load up MetaMask. You can sign the transaction, and then it will complete. It will appear on Etherscan. You'll be able to verify the transaction, and you will be able to do all of that by following me along in this tutorial. We're going to need to go and get this HTML template. So it's a component that I got from the Bootstrap website. So we'll go over there and grab that in a moment. And then we'll load up Visual Studio Code and go through it together. I'm going to remove myself down here from the bottom right-hand side of the screen so I don't interrupt with your coding. And I'll see you in the next video. Head on over to getbootstrap.com. Click on Examples and download the examples. It will download a zip folder with all of the following snippets and custom components inside that folder. So go and put that download somewhere where you're going to be working from, because the component that we're going to be using will be the dashboard. It will look something like this. We're going to need to download this, open it up, reconnect everything, delete this chart, delete this table, and just tidy it up, maybe add a sign in button up here, get rid of some of the things that we don't need, and that's what we will use for our exercise. So this is the download. I'm just going to extract this. Once that's extracted, I'll go into the folder and just take out the dashboard code that I want. So I'm going to copy these files and paste them in here. Okay. Now we go over to Visual Studio Code and load up this folder that I want to work from, because these are the files we need to change. So I've loaded up Visual Studio Code. Let's open the folder. There we go. And then find the folder you want to work in. And then once you've found the folder, click on select folder and it will load up the files in here for you. It may be in another subfolder, just go and find them once you've loaded that up. Close down these boxes and then we can jump into, first of all, the index.html. Now, if I right click run this, it's not going to work very well because a lot of things will be broken. If we right click inspect, we can see that it is failing to apply a couple of the styles here. So we need to go and fix the links. The first one is this one here, which is bootstrapmin.css. Now that is inside of this Bootstrap folder. And you'll notice that in the folder we extracted, it actually has the name of the file twice. So we need to go and find and reconnect that. So now it's actually just directly in the Bootstrap folder. So I'm going to remove this and start typing Bootstrap. There it is. It's found it. And then it's found the second folder. It's in assets. It's in dist. It's in CSS. And it's that one. Okay, good. And so if I save this, it should get rid of one of the errors. I can see on the right hand side, it's gone from 3 down to 1. So let's go right to the bottom, fix the other one, which is this one. Okay, and it's the bootstrap bundle min.js. So we'll try and find that folder again. There it is. Assets, distribution. This one's in JS. There it is. That's the file. Good. Save that. Go back. Okay, there we go. We're pretty much where we need to. So let's delete the chart and the table. So we'll go into, oh, there's the table here. So we'll just go from this table tag up to the top. We can just remove that. In fact, we can remove the table responsive div. Keep the title. Now this canvas can also go because that's where the chart will be. And that will probably cause an error. So let's go back to our file. You can see the chart, the table's gone, but it has an error here inside of dashboard.js. It's looking to read an object that doesn't exist. So let's go and remove that. It's going to be this one and possibly this one, but this is the one we don't need anymore. Don't need a new chart. Okay, so this is an immediately invoked function expression. So I'll just put old bootstrap code, and we'll remove this top bit that we don't need, and we'll put our moralis code in here. So we need to go and initialize and have some login functions and things like that we'll come back to shortly. Let's just go back into our HTML and remove these buttons and maybe just change one of them to a sign-in button. Okay, so that'll be this one here. So let's delete that button and also this button. Maybe have this one as login. And we'll keep the classes as they were. We'll just maybe have ID login. Obviously, you can change that to be whatever you want. So that's just our basic template to get started. Okay, let's get our moralis boilerplate code inside of our JavaScript. So the three main things that we need to do is to initialize moralis. So we can just use our typical initialization function here. We'll just make sure that you paste in your own server URL and application ID. And we also need to build out two functions, one to log in and one to log out. Standard stuff. I've seen this many times already before. And we don't need the check user function because I haven't any need for that in this example. But the function for login, we'll connect that to the login button. It's just going to await moralis to authenticate. And then this one will just be to await moralis.user.logout. So we just need to then connect those buttons. So we'll just paste in a couple of click listeners and then connect them to the HTML buttons. So we've got a HTML button that we'll call btn login and another one called btn logout, and that will run the individual functions. Let's just make sure that we do have btn logout as an ID in our, that's the login. So btn login, where's the logout? So I think it was called sign out. There we go. We'll just put an ID on there, btn logout. And then we'll just test that, see if we've got any errors. Moralis is not defined. Okay, that's because we need to install the SDK and the Web3. So we need to go back to the HTML. And at the top, in the head, we need to paste our moralis SDK code. So get that from the documentation. Quite ugly, this template, but feel free to reorganize it however you like. And then I'm just going to paste the moralis SDK in here. There we go. So refresh that page. And let's see what other issues we've got. That current server is expired. After updating that, I'll just replace that with my function, my new function, save that, go back to my app. And that should work. So if we log in, there we go, authenticate, and we're signed in. So we don't have anything handling a signed in user, so the page is not going to change. So we'll just check that we get a moralis user object back. And we do. Excellent. So we are signed in. Let's just check the sign out button, run the same function, and it's null. Good. So that seems to work just fine. So now we can use the moralis functionality. Okay, so let's go over to the documentation. We are going to be taking a look at a few things. So in our sending ETH tokens and NFTs documentation down the left, we already know that sending assets using bare bones low-level libraries like web3.js is difficult. And now I'm going to show you just how easy it is with moralis. So if we click on transferring native asset first of all, so that would mean transferring Ether or BNB or Matic on either the mainnet or test nets. And we're going to be looking at running that together. Now, in order to send any native balance, we use await moralis.transfer, and we need to send through some options. And the options in here, there's a few. There's the type, which we need to hard code as native. It's a native balance that we're transferring. If it was an ERC20 token, we would type in ERC20. And that's what the difference would be here. If it was an NFT, we would be transferring ERC721 and so on. Okay, so this specific version, we're going to be using the type of native. Then what we need to do is provide it with an amount that we want to send, and we need to convert that amount because, for example, if we want to send 0.5 ETH, we need to convert that down to WEI. So that means a calculation is needed to convert it. Now, there is already a helper utility that we can use. It's moralis.units.eth. So if we type in the amount of ETH that we want to transfer, then it will convert that into the number of WEI that it needs to send. That's the second option, that's the amount. And the third option is the receiver. So it's the address that's going to receive the native token that you want to send, or the native balance that you want to send. We need to pass across 3 pieces of information there. This first one we will hard code, but the second 2 we can have as an amount that we will change. So let's go over to our HTML and just produce a simple form with 2 input fields, one for the amount and then one for the receiver's address. At the bottom of those 2 fields, we'll have a button that just simply says send. Okay, so in our code, let's go to our HTML. Let's just find a piece that we want to write into. This is our left-hand side menu, and I think this is going to be the bulk of the content in here. Let's change section title to just application for now. And let's put our first one in here as just native balances. Okay, and this is where we'll put our content. So if we head on over to Bootstrap now, and so we'll just go back in our browser. There we go. And up in home or maybe docs, we want to find some information about forms. There we go. So let's just go to forms. Maybe click on overview here. And if we scroll down, yep, that'll do. So we've just got 2 input fields and a button. That will work just fine. So inside of the form tag, because I'm not going to actually take the form tag, I'm just going to take the divs. I'm going to copy that HTML, go over to our form, paste that in there, see how that looks. And that should work just fine for now. And then we just need to hollow this out and just make it as we want it. So we'll go back to HTML. I'm going to remove the labels and just keep the inputs. I'm also not going to have these divs with the text inside it. Just remove those. And I'm not going to keep that checkbox. So I'll remove that as well. Get rid of the label. And all of the divs that are not needed. Let's just refresh that. Okay, we need some placeholders, and maybe we'll just make this sort of like maybe 6 columns or something like that. I'll put that title inside of the div, and then we'll just make the div call medium 6 and add a container. Okay, well, that's just a centralized bit. That should be fine. And so we'll just put a couple of placeholders into these so we know what they are. So the first one will be the amount. And the second one will be the address to send to. Save that, go back. Oh, there we go. Amount to send, address to send to. And then this submit button will run a function which we need to write. So we need to put an ID on this. And we'll just call it something like transfer native. Okay, let's tidy up the HTML. I've noticed that this has broken. So we need to close that div. So that connects to this one, and then this one connects to this one, and then that's the button, and then this would connect to this one. Okay, let's save that. And then that just separates the 2 input fields. Okay, fine. So now what we need to do is go and write a JavaScript function that is going to collect the information from both of these fields, and then package it up and send it into our moralis function when we click this button. So there's 3 different things we need to do there. Let's go and write those out. Let's get the details from these fields first. Do we have IDs from those input fields? We do, but they're pretty ugly. So we'll just say, we'll call this native amount, and then we'll put another ID of native address. Okay, I'll just copy that, save that, go over to our JavaScript here, and we'll just write an asynchronous function, which is transfer native. So let's go and get the values from those input fields. So the first one that we'll do is the address was the first one I remembered. So const address equals document.getElement by ID. The element was native address, and then we need its value. We can copy that, and then we'll go and get the native amount, and we'll call that amount. Okay, so that's the first two values from the item, and then what we need to do is go back to the documentation, and then we need to go and get this function. So we'll copy that, paste it in here, and this is the actual sending part. So the options object that we will start to form, well, the first thing is type native. We can hard code that in, that's fine. The next one is the amount, and it's moralis.units 0.5. Well, it's not 0.5, it's going to be an amount that we will give it, which will be this. And the receiver, well, let's just separate these out into different lines here just for simplicity. Okay. And the receiver is going to be an address, which we will give it as the address. Now, what you want to do inside of your code is make sure that you have some kind of checking here, because this address will need to be a certain amount of characters, for example. So you might want to put in some handling to check that. The amount will need to be an amount. It can't be text. So you need to make sure maybe that the HTML or the validation of those fields are in place. But for now, we'll just assume that we're going to enter correct information for this example. Just tidying up that function. And then we would pass that options object into this await moralis.transfer options. So that is transfer native. We need to attach transfer native to our button. We need to create a new click listener here. So I've copied this one, and then we'll attach that to our submit button, which has an ID of transfer native. And then when that transfer native button is clicked, we need to run the function transfer native. Save that, go back to our application. So amount to send, well, let's just see. I think I am signed in. Maybe I'll go to something like Rinkeby. There we go. So with Rinkeby, I've got 7.3 ETH. So let's go in there and try and send an amount. Better just make sure that I have logged in, because the application will need to run moralis.authenticate in order to use these features. So even if I am actually logged in, as I come to this application, it's worth just clicking the login button again to make sure that it runs moralis.authenticate. And then if I go to send one, send to this address and my clipboard, let's see if we get any errors. No errors. And even better, we actually get a MetaMask pop up here. And then if we just expand this out, Rinkeby test network, it wants to send one to the address that I want to send it to, both Chris test. Let's confirm that. And then we wait. So in our MetaMask, we will see that there is a pending 1 ETH transfer here. I've got 7.32 ETH in one of these accounts. And in the other one, which I'm trying to send to, I have 5.15. Now you can see it only took a few seconds or so, but that one is 6.3. The other one is 6.1. And the transfer was complete. Fantastic. So that is the first part done. That is how you would send balance from one user to another using just one line of code, which includes some options that we're sending through to it. Single line of code, and you can transfer money cross borders from one address to another straight out of your application using Moralis. How easy is that? Okay, let's go back to our HTML then, and let's just change this because it says application, but it's not really application, is it? It's transferring native balance. And then what we want to do is just minimize this one. Okay, so it goes to there. Let's just copy that HTML, move it down one block, because we're going to move over to the next function in our documentation, which will be transferring ERC20 tokens. So when sending an ERC20, you need to know that the contract address of the token and the number of decimals are required as part of your options object. So we're going to be using one line of code, which is await moralis.transfer, exactly the same as before. But the options object will be slightly different this time, because not only do we need the amount and the receiver like we had before, we need to provide the contract address, and we need to provide type ERC20. So what do we mean by contract address here then? Well, if you tried adding any kind of new token to your wallet, for example, in MetaMask, then that's one thing that you'll typically be asked for is what is the token address for that particular asset. So when you try and import a token, it says there, token contract address. So it does not refer to the address that holds your personal tokens, which is just your normal receiver address. It has nothing to do with that. To find out what the address is, you're probably best off going on to something like Etherscan /tokens, or maybe just doing a search for it there. But essentially, it's asking for the address of the location where the actual token contract that manages the logic for that token appears, because each ERC20 token was generated via a smart contract which just conformed to the ERC20 standard of tokens, but it's the address of that smart contract for that token that you need to find. So let's just take a look inside the MetaMask to see whether I have any tokens that already have a token address. So in this one, I have link tokens. Click on view on Etherscan, then it will give us a contract address right here. Now, if you don't have any ERC20 chain link from the Rinkeby network, which is what I'm currently using, or the Rinkeby chain, then you can just go onto Google and just put something like free Rinkeby ERC20 or something like that. Sorry, not Rinkeby, free chain link, and then Rinkeby, perhaps, something like that. And then if you scroll down, it will say, here we go, acquire testnet link. So we can just click on that. And then there's some instructions here for how you can go to the testnet link faucet and go and get the tokens that you'd need. Okay, so let's just go back to this and copy that address and just close these ones down. And I'm just going to go back into the code and paste, while I'm thinking about it, that address that I've just taken, which is here. Okay, so let's just comment that out. So we'll just say that that's the chain link address, Rinkeby, something like that. Okay, so what do we need to do next then? Well, we need to go and build a new function, which we'll call transfer ERC20. I'll move that down. And in here, we need to build a new object and go and get some new information from our front end, because we're not going to be using the old one that we built in our HTML. So if we save that for the moment and come back, let's go to our HTML, minimize the native balances. And now we're going to change this to ERC20. That's just the name of the div that we're going to be using. And inside there, so transferring ERC20, let's just change these out. Just going to remove some of the HTML I don't want. Let's just maybe put a horizontal rule in between these two. Go back to our app. Here we go. So this will be the next one that we're going to do. And if we go back to our documentation, so contract address and the type ERC20 is what we'd need. So let's hard code ERC20 into our JavaScript, into this one. And we're going to need a contract address. So I'll just go and put that at the bottom. And what did it want us to call that contract address? So we'll call it contract address. And then we're going to be giving it contract, which we don't yet have, because we need to go and find that. I can probably just copy that down. And then we'll create a new, 3 new fields. So we need to go back to our HTML and get our element IDs. So native amount is not going to be that. It will be ERC20 amount. Just change wherever it says native to ERC20. We need a new input field. So I'll copy that whole div. Just tidy up this HTML a little bit. And so that's going to be ERC20 contract. So amount, address, and contract. Amount, address, and contract. Swap these out. Actually, I can just change that to ERC20. Yep. Amount, address, and contract. That's good. Okay, if we go back to the documentation, we're going to be using moralis.units.token. This one was moralis.units.eth, so we need to change that to token. Now, this method actually takes in 2 parameters instead, or 2 arguments instead. And the first one is the amount that we want to send, which is fine. We can pass it that. But the next one will be the number of decimals. Just go back to our Etherscan here. And we'll just see whether it tells us. It does. Okay, so it's 18 decimals there. So we'll go back to our code. And we'll just have decimals there. And we'll use that in a moment. Save the changes we've made to our JavaScript and our HTML. Go back. we have to make a change to this one that says address to send to, but actually it's not the address. This is going to be the contract address. And we should also, and this is not ideal, but we should be putting the decimals in there as well. ERC20 decimals. Oop, spell it right. Decimals. And we'll just leave that there for the moment. And then I think we need to go back to our JavaScript with this decimals. We need to collect that information, which we'll just call it decimals. And we'll find it from that value. And then we need to pass it into this, because if we go back to our documentation, close this one, it was passing in two pieces of information into this token method. It was passing in the amount that we want to send and also the decimals. So we need to put the decimals in there as well. So that's the amount. They're the decimals. There we go. So are we using all four? We're using the address, we're using the amount, we're using the contract, and we're using the decimals. And then it will run that transfer function. So we'll save that and let's test it. We'll see whether or not it works. We need to go and connect the button down here. So transfer ERC20. And we need to run the function. We'll copy this one. We'll call this something like function click listeners. And this one is clicked. We will run this function, but it's going to be called transfer ERC20. There we go. Make sure you change the name of that. Otherwise, you'll have two functions with the same name. But back in on Etherscan, you'll remember that the contract address was here and the decimals were here. For the sake of this tutorial now, let's just use this information. Later on in this course, I'll show you how you can find more of the details of all of the tokens that you own, but we need to use a different function that we have not yet covered. So for now, let's just use this. So this is the contract address and the decimals to use. We've got that saved down here already. So if we go over to the front end of the application, always make sure that when you test a new function that you just re-authenticate by re-signing in using MetaMask. So let's try this out. We'll try and send 3. Let's try and send some to an address that I have on my clipboard here. There we go. And the contract address we already have copied into our clipboard from the Etherscan. So we can paste that in there, and we know it was 18 decimals. If we click submit, no errors. And there we go. It gives us an opportunity to send it. And then once we click on confirm, that will go through. So we can go and look at what we have. So there's a pending 3 link transfer here. And currently our assets are 117. So this now will change from 117 down to 114 when that transaction goes through. And there we go. It almost did it literally immediately. So it changed to 114. And that's it. That is how you would transfer. So using just, if we go back to our code, one line of code, moralis.transfer, with some options, we're able to transfer ERC20 tokens cross borders from one address to another using our application with Moralis. And the options that we sent it required some information from our front end. The only 2 tricky things to find were the contract and the decimals, but I'll show you a much, much easier way of finding that from a user in the next section when we look at the Web3 API. But the address, the amount, things like this, super simple to add in. You pass it the type, which is hard-coded as ERC20, wrap that into an object, pass it through moralis.transfer, and there you go. Very, very simple. And to finish up this section of documentation, there are instructions here for transferring ERC721 tokens and transferring ERC1155 tokens, which are semi-fungible. So what's the difference between the two? Well, typically with an ERC721 token, you will only ever have one of those items, and that would be an NFT, for example. You'll only ever have one of that particular NFT. It'll be completely unique, non-fungible, and so quantity-wise, you will only be able to transfer a single one of them. 1155 tokens, they're also NFTs, but they are semi-fungible, which means that you can actually transfer more than one of them. So maybe there were 100 of them minted originally, or 1,000 or 10,000 of them, and you might want to transfer 5 or 10 or however many. With 1155 tokens, you can do that because there will be more than one of them. But the process for transferring an NFT is exactly the same as transferring any of the other assets that we've transferred already, such as the ERC20 and the native assets. You simply build an object which requires some information. You need to type in ERC721 or ERC1155, depending on what type of ERC it is, what type of NFT it is. You need to pass through a receiver's address for who's going to receive the NFT. You need to pass the contract address for the NFT, and you need to pass the token ID for the NFT as well. For this example today, we're not going to actually run through this until we've covered the Web3 API, because most of the time you won't know what this information is off the top of your head. You need to find it somehow. And this Web3 API section will show you how to find that information. So what we might do is just defer the demonstration of this to a later part of the course in here, once we know how to use the Web3 API. And that's it, guys. That is the section for sending ETH, tokens, and NFTs complete. I'm looking forward to getting into the Web3 API section because our API is a beast. There are so many functions inside this Web3 API that will help you build your applications so much faster. So I'm super looking forward to getting into that. So join me in the next video.